When I was growing up, I played a lot of 007 games. I wouldn't even say that I'm a really big fan of James Bond as a media franchise. I'm just a person who enjoys fun and well-made video games. And over the years, there have been a ton of titles revolving around this legendary character. Out of the countless number of James Bond games that exist, my favorite without a doubt is Nightfire. I spent countless hours playing both the campaign and multiplayer of this title. It's a genuinely great game that my family and I got a lot of enjoyment out of. I also enjoyed Agent Under Fire, despite it having just a few too many driving missions for my taste. And of course, I played lots of Goldeneye 007 for the Nintendo 64, and well, you all know how I feel about that game. Among all of the 007 games though, there exists a really interesting spin-off title that has sadly been forgotten over the years. It's an entry that I played a lot growing up, and one I have a ton of nostalgia for. That game is Goldeneye Rogue Agent. Rogue Agent was developed by Danger Close Games and published by Electronic Arts. You know, everybody's favorite gaming publisher. Released in 2004 to average reviews and very little fanfare, it's so easy to see why almost nobody talks about Rogue Agent nowadays. It's a weird, one-off entry that didn't really even wow anybody over 20 years ago. I played this game for the first time during Christmas of 2007, which was when my family finally got an original Xbox. Rogue Agent was one of the games my parents got me for the holiday, alongside a few other titles that I sadly can't remember the names of. Yeah, I grew up in a poor family. We didn't get an Xbox 360 until 2008, and a PS3 until 2009. Despite me being beyond late to the party, I had a really good time playing Rogue Agent that Christmas and for a few years after. But it's common knowledge that children will eat up pretty much anything, so for a long time I've wanted to revisit this game to see if it holds up, or if it was ever even good in the first place. Will I like it? Let's find out. The plot and premise are without a doubt the most interesting things about Rogue Agent. It's definitely unique as far as James Bond games go. For starters, you don't even play as James Bond. Like the title implies, the protagonist in this game is a rogue MI6 agent who was severely wounded by the iconic antagonist Dr. No during an assignment that took place 3 years before the start of the game. This agent, whose right eye was shot out of his skull during the encounter, becomes obsessed with the idea of getting payback on Dr. No, and as a result, he adopts a by any means necessary mentality when it comes to completing missions, leading to him eventually being dismissed by MI6 for reckless brutality. Jesus. With our anti-hero protagonist out of a job, he decides to start working for Auric Goldfinger, who is another iconic villain of the James Bond franchise. Thanks to Mr. Goldfinger, the protagonist is given a cybernetic implant where his right eye used to be, which earns him the codename Goldeneye. It's up to you, the player, to help Goldeneye get his revenge on Dr. No by murdering an innumerable amount of people in his way. Now, with a premise like that, you've got me on board, but like I've said countless times in the past, the most important thing about a video game to me is the actual gameplay. So is it any good? Let's jump right in and see. Off rip, I would like to make this extremely clear. The gunplay in Rogue Agent stinks. I wouldn't say it's as bad as Shell Shock, but it's still pretty subpar, even for 2004 standards. Now it's super easy to look at this gameplay and just say that I suck. I actually don't blame you one bit if you think that, because look at this! But Aiming in this game just feels ridiculously sluggish, and I never got used to how it felt. Apparently, there's an aim assist option that you can enable, but I didn't feel any difference after I turned it on. Beyond the crappy aiming though, the weapons just completely lack any sense of impact. I use that term a lot in these reviews, and the reason I do so is because it's really important for an FPS game to have guns that feel good to use. Rogue Agent's guns have very little feedback when fired, which is so unsatisfying. I realize that I just spat an ass ton of venom towards this game, but I do have some genuinely positive things to say about the weapons. The reload animations are superb, like insanely well made. Goldeneye doesn't reload his guns like a normal person. He adds some flair and style to it, and I fucking love it. The weapons themselves are also really cool. You essentially have 2 weapon slots, but it's not as simple as it sounds. One of these slots is always going to be occupied by the Spec 9, which is your own personal handgun. Looking like an extremely modified Walther P99, it has unlimited ammo and decent stopping power, but a slow rate of fire, which helps it feel balanced. Your other weapon slot can either be occupied by a single big gun or a pair of small guns, and you already know which one I like more. Dual wielding guns is awesome in every game it's in, and I desperately wish it would become mainstream again. Gamers tend to decry the concept of dual wielding because it's impractical and unrealistic, and to that I say, fuck your realism. Dual wielding is fun. Anyway, Rogue Agent takes dual wielding to the next level by allowing you to have a different gun in each hand, which is something that I really like. The only other games I can think of that let you do this are the original Hitman, The Darkness 1 and 2, Turok's 2008 reboot, and lastly, the sadly forgotten true crime games. If you know of any other shooter that lets you do this, please let me know. Interestingly, there is a complete lack of blood and gore in Rogue Agent. When you pepper enemies with gunfire in this game, sparks fly out of their bodies instead, and this reminds me so much of the aforementioned Turok reboot. I'm a huge fan of gore. I always take the Bloody Mess perk in the Fallout games, but I don't think Rogue Agent lacking gore is really a bad thing. I would actually say it's an interesting compromise. Rogue Agent is played over 8 levels, and they are all as linear as you can get. There is a good amount of locational variety between them, but they all feel empty and lifeless. They kinda remind me of the maps in the original Doom games, vague, abstract areas that have this surreal atmosphere. Personally speaking, I don't really have an issue with this, but I am a bigger fan of areas that feel lived in. The more pressing issue is how every single level plays out exactly the same. I'm usually not one to complain about this, but Rogue Agent is the epitome of monotony. Powers help break up the monotony a little bit, but not by much. There are 4 powers in total, and you unlock them one by one as you progress through the game. They require something called energy to use, which replenishes on its own over time, so while you can't recklessly spam these powers, you will be able to use them extremely often. I really love FPS games that combine standard gunplay with superpowers, but the powers in this game are kinda mid. Did I really just use the word mid, unironically? The first power you unlock is MRI Vision, which is obtained in the second level. MRI Vision allows you to see enemies through walls and behind cover, which can be helpful, but I almost never use it. The second power obtained is EM Hack, which lets you activate environmental traps from a distance and disable enemy weapons for what feels like half a second. This is useful sometimes, but not really. The third power, Polarity Shield, is certainly the most valuable, but it costs so much energy to use. When Polarity Shield is activated, any damage taken will drain your energy instead of your health, which can be life-saving. I use this more than the other 3 powers put together. Lastly, we have the Magnetic Induction Field, which allows you to pick up enemies with your mind and throw them around. MIF is a lot of fun to use, but it costs 3/4 of your energy to just throw one guy around, so sadly, you won't get to use it all that much. In summary, the concept of having powers in a 007 game is a fantastic idea, but Rogue Agent's execution of the concept is kinda lackluster. However, do you know what's not lackluster? Being able to take human shields. Yes, this is why I love video games. I am both encouraged and rewarded for committing war crimes. Seriously though, there exists a mechanic in this game that's referred to as rogue bonuses, and it's a really fun system. Upon completing a level, you're scored based on how well you performed, and earning rogue bonuses are the best way to getting a high score. Blowing shit up, taking hostages, using environmental hazards, and shooting people in the back are just a few of the rogue bonuses you can be awarded with. You also get a rogue bonus for just beating somebody's ass. For whatever reason, getting a high score in a level unlocks concept art and extra multiplayer maps, which isn't like a game-changing thing, but it's still worth pointing out. If you're wondering why I'm not touching on the multiplayer in this video, it's because I have very few friends. In a stark contrast to the 007 games that came before this one, you have regenerating health. With how slow and limited the movement is, you would be justified in thinking that this would cause the game to devolve into a boring, stand still, sit behind cover fuckfest. But thanks to the game's incredibly stupid AI, it actually doesn't. For around 90% of the game, I'm just casually strolling about in the open, gunning down these idiots who might as well be brain dead. So yeah, the gameplay in Rogue Agent is a mixed bag for sure. It's in no way the worst shooter I have ever played, but I've also played a million better ones. Honestly, I like this game way more than I should. Nostalgia definitely plays a part in this, but Rogue Agent is a legitimately entertaining game at the end of the day. However, is this a game that I can recommend to you, the viewer? Maybe? This is the problem with reviewing old games. They're fucking old. You need a very strong resolve to go back and play something that was made a long time ago. And even for 6th generation standards, I wouldn't say that Rogue Agent is a particularly great game. What I will say is, if the gameplay you've seen here doesn't pique your interest, then I can't really recommend it to you, because the gameplay you've been seeing, this is it. There's not really that much depth to the overall experience. Goldeneye Rogue Agent proved to be a commercial success, selling over 1 million copies by the end of 2004, but ultimately, this was much less than the 3 James Bond games that preceded it. There were ideas of a sequel thrown around, but nothing ever came to fruition. While I personally would have really liked to have seen a follow-up, I get why one never got made. Rogue Agent had an extremely troubled development thanks to Electronic Arts being Electronic Arts. Work on the game was incredibly slow, and EA really wanted it to be out by the end of 2004, so Danger Close Games had to cut a lot of stuff from both the campaign and multiplayer. It's a classic case of executive meddling hindering what was supposed to be a really great game. You know, it can be kind of scary replaying a game that you loved when you were young. Finding out that one of your childhood favorites is actually a total stinker is never fun. However, I'm happy to say that I actually had a pretty good time revisiting Rogue Agent. It's a flawed experience for sure, but it does just enough things well for me to forgive the things that it does poorly. I also admittedly have a soft spot for edgy games, and you can tell from just the cover art and title that Rogue Agent has its fair share of edge. Something else I have neglected to mention up to this point is the fantastic musical score composed by Paul Oakenfold. The music you've been hearing in my game reviews, a lot of it is from Rogue Agent. Even if you never plan on playing this game, I highly recommend checking out the soundtrack. It rules. Overall, I'm so glad that I decided to play Rogue Agent again. I won't ever try to convince anyone that it's amazing, but it is fun, and ultimately, that's why I like to play video games. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next game review.